Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, August 24th, 2020, the 4th of Elul, 5780, and we are also now live on Facebook as well for this first part of the show. Hope you're doing well in your part of the world. Don't forget, you can always get in touch with me, Josh, at thelandofisrael.com, or on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we have a very special guest here, thanks to modern day technology and Zoom. And I will introduce him right now. Aryeh Green. He is currently the Chief Strategy Officer at Gigawatt Global, an Israeli company developing renewable energy projects in Africa. He's also the author of a book called My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land. He's also, he was the co-founder and director of MediaCentral. Many of you may be familiar with MediaCentral, a Jerusalem-based project of honest reporting, providing services for the foreign media in Israel. He has an extensive resume. And Aryeh, I apologize, we're going to stop right there, or we'll be introducing you all morning.
Exactly, that's enough.
How are you? How's it going? Welcome to the show.
Thank God. Thank you, Josh. It's good to be here, and thank you for having me on.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to have you on, and I want to get to a bunch of different stuff you're working on. But let's start with the first thing. You're currently working as the Chief Strategy Officer at Gigawatt Global, a very important project which helps the people of Africa. So if you can, talk about that project.
Sure. We're known as Aryeh Global here in Israel. That's the service company for the Gigawatt Global company, which is registered in the Netherlands. And basically, we're a group of Israelis who started the solar industry here in Israel with the Arab Power Company, who were asked by a number of different African countries to come and do the same for them, to bring renewable energy to Africa. We built the first solar PV field in sub-Saharan Africa and East Africa and Rwanda in 2014. That was also the first field of the Power Africa initiative, which was the United States government's initiative to bring more electricity to Africa to promote economic development, humanitarian goals, what have you. And we're now building in Burundi, another very difficult market, shall we say, one of the poorest nations on the planet. And we've got a pipeline of projects, both solar and wind, as well as even mini hydro in about a dozen countries across sub-Saharan Africa, including Liberia, Nigeria, Ethiopia, Kenya, South Sudan, Zambia, and many others. And it's a wonderful combination, what can I say, Josh, of both doing well by doing good, meaning it's called impact investing. It's making an impact on the world, promoting economic development and women's empowerment and health and access to water and what have you, all through the provision of energy and also, of course, environmental promotion of environmental goals in terms of promoting renewable energy. And it's also serving the strategic and diplomatic goals of the State of Israel, because even though we're a Dutch registered company, we are known, as most of us, as Israelis who are coming and providing these kind of benefits to these African countries. So it's a wonderful industry to be in, even in the time of Corona, even in the time of economic downturn across the world.
It sounds like an amazing initiative. I'm curious to know if the BDS haters out there, all of those who spend their days and nights and weekends and whatnot criticizing Israel, I wonder if any of them are aware of the fact that Israel is actually, exporting its technologies to some of the poorest countries in the world, helping people of color, and doing all these amazing things. You don't see those haters of Israel talking about, certainly not promoting any of these amazing initiatives, do you?
Well, you're certainly right. And although formally we're a Dutch company, but there's no question that we have our Israeli headquarters. Our headquarters are in Jerusalem, and we're known throughout the region as basically Israelis who are doing this. And you're familiar with the Mashav program from the Israeli Foreign Ministry, going back to Golda Meir. You're quite right that Israel's contributions, whether it's in renewable energy or technology or other economic promotion, Israel's relations with Africa and contribution to African economic and social and political development is obviously something that's not only not well known, but ignored, as you rightly put it, in terms of the haters of Israel. There's not a lot of recognition. I know that you and Israeli Cool and Stand With Us and other projects have been very, very good at helping to promote Israel's contribution to African economic development, social issues. You've got NGOs like Innovation Africa, which used to be the Jewish Heart for Africa, bringing water, clean water to Uganda and other African countries. And you're right, it's not well enough known, and it's unfortunately ignored by those who, the haters are going to hate, aren't they?
They are going to hate, but if you're out there and you're not aware of this, pay attention next time you're thinking about criticizing Israel or our policy. See what Israel is doing for the world. And one of the projects you used to work on, which also did an amazing job and continues to do so, from what I understand, is MediaCentral offices in downtown Jerusalem. And this is something that you started, and I want to know a little bit more about where they are currently. But this is currently a service in order to provide journalists who are being dropped off. I've seen it myself. Journalists dropped off here in Israel. They're trying to cover a story. They're wandering around Emek Rephaim. They don't know where to go, who to talk to. They don't understand the situation. And you guys started this service in order to provide journalists with the opportunity to speak to Israelis, to get to different places around the country, to really understand the reality here, not the stuff that they're getting from perhaps their governments or other biased entities back home. So talk a little bit about MediaCentral and where are they today?
Well, actually, let's start with that. We're more or less in the same place as we were, just across the street on Rav Kook. As a project of honest reporting, MediaCentral basically kind of took the battle almost, to the field, I would say. And after the first 10 years of its existence when I ran it, it's continued to go from strength to strength. The team there continues to provide the kind of services as you were just describing. It's all about understanding that accuracy is Israel's best ally, that we don't have to necessarily spin the story or even promote Israel within the context of the media. Within the world of the Land of Israel network and pro-Israel advocacy, that there are contexts, politics, college campuses and elsewhere where really advocacy is needed. We need to promote an agenda. We need to promote policies which are going to be good for America or Europe or Israel or all three. With the media, advocacy sometimes or often backfires because the media on the whole, and I'm generalizing here, journalists on the whole want to report the story itself. They don't want to be convinced that one side is right or the other. And one of the things that we learned when we set up MediaCentral, its first 10, now 15 years of operations, is that most of the foreign journalists that come to Israel, you are correct, don't have a lot of background. And most of them are actually professional journalists. They want to go deeper into the reality. The problem is they carry the baggage of the social and intellectual milieu of the university campuses and the media outlets that they work with, which are primarily pro-Palestinian. I wouldn't say anti-Israel, but certainly accepting the Palestinian perspective on the history of the conflict, etc. So, but they're professionals. They want to go deeper into the story. What MediaCentral has done and continues to do is to help them to go deeper into that reality that you were just mentioning, what the real history of the conflict is, what the real situation on the ground is, what the real legal status of the territories are, what the reality of Israel, culture, society, what have you, which is a multi-ethnic, democratic, society doing its best within a very, very difficult situation. And what we've found is that the majority of these journalists, when shown the reality, when given the facts, they often change at least some of their perspective. And that's why I always say accuracy is Israel's best ally, because we know, those of us who've been involved in these efforts like you and me for the last few decades, we know that the truth is on our side. So our challenge is to help that truth to get exposed, the fact that our military operations are defensive in nature, the fact that those territories were part of the original mandate given to Great Britain for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people, the fact that our achievement, as it were, of liberating those territories was the result of a defensive military operation. Whatever it might be, we know we're a society where the A word, the apartheid word, which I never use in a sentence along with the name of our country, doesn't apply. doesn't apply to Israel and even to our dealings in the territories. The more that truth becomes known, the better we look, warts and all, with all the justified and reasonable criticism of our different policies. People can debate, reasonable people can debate all sorts of issues related to our policies, but that doesn't change the truth. And getting the truth out there is what MediaCentral does.
And is Laura running the show now?
Yes,
Laura
that's
Kornfeld?
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
no, I know her very well.
Yeah,
So
sure.
they're in good hands over there. I want to
Absolutely.
talk about your books. It seems, correct me if I'm wrong, that you went from MediaCentral before you took your current position at Gigawatt Global. You took I don't know if you would call it a vacation or a break, because 700 miles on the Israel Trail certainly, while I'm sure it was an unbelievable experience, and you can read about it in your book, My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land. I'm sure there were parts of it which were very difficult. I mean, this is a rigorous terrain in certain areas of the country. But tell me if I got it right. You went from MediaCentral, you took the time off, if you will, and you did the entire Israel Trail. Talk about that experience. How long did it take you? What did you gain from it? What inspired you to write the book? And talk, if you can, a little bit about what you learned along the trail.
Wow, I'll be happy to. And I also want to connect the dots because it's interesting. We were just talking about MediaCentral, and I actually took a leave of absence and some vacation, but I still remained and came back to run MediaCentral for another year after it. But fascinatingly enough, it wasn't the purpose. Hiking the Israel Trail was not meant to reconnect me with our roots, our connection to the land, and Israel advocacy and what have you. But it really did have that effect, which was a wonderful side or added benefit. I hiked the Israel Trail, and yes, it's about 800 miles. In fact, I hiked it all alone in the course of 2 months, 8 weeks of hiking. Didn't hike on Shabbat, but I did 6 days a week, all alone with a 50-pound pack on my back. And a little bit unusual, because you've lived here. And you do live here, that usually the crowd that hikes the Israel Trail are kind of right after the army 21-year-old crowd or what have you. So to do it at 51 was also a little bit unusual. I did it aside from out of a love of hiking. I grew up in California, did a lot of hiking there, took my kids on their annual school trips over the course of decades living here in Israel. But I had just gone through, unfortunately, a very, very difficult challenging period in my life, a devastating divorce, which turned my life basically upside down. And I went out on a hike to, as one of the people, I described this in the book, one of the people I met, said, okay, nikui rosh, he said, he summed up in a Hebrew phrase, cleaning your head, clearing out your head in literally 2 words. It was an 8-week odyssey of hiking of 20 kilometers, 12 miles every day. To clear my head, to get myself back on track, as it were, in my life. And I never intended to write a book about it, but the experience was not just an overwhelmingly positive, inspiring, and uplifting experience. It also taught me so many things, not only about our history and the people I met and our connection to our ancestral homeland, but also helping me to meet my personal challenge of getting over that very difficult divorce, which I hadn't looked for, which I hadn't asked for, which was not my choice, and moving on with my life. And so I learned quite a few lessons on the hike, and the book ended up becoming almost 2 books in one. It was a description of the hike itself, and for people who either haven't visited Israel or aren't able to, and now with Corona, of course, even kind of vicariously walk the land of Israel with me and explore issues related to our culture and our history and the society, the people I met, the places I saw. But it also is a description of the lessons that I learned that helped me meet my personal challenge and get over my divorce, move on with my life, and which people have told me have been helpful to others meeting their own personal challenges. So that's why I ended up writing the book without that being my intention.
Wow, that's an amazing story. And in my mind, and I'm not trying to poke fun, God forbid, in any way, I'm seeing the movie Forrest Gump. I don't know if anyone has compared you to him before. When he just decided he's going to get out and start running.
And start walking.
And start walking or running. I mean, that's really what you did to clear your head and to get through that difficult period. I don't know if anyone has ever called you the Forrest Gump of Israel, but I mean, and by the way, that is no easy feat to do it all. And would you say in 8 weeks?
Yeah.
2 months? I mean, some people take years. They do a little bit at a time, and they take, really a long time to get it all done. But that's pretty amazing to be out there in nature alone with your bag and hiking the trails of Israel. And for those of you who want to get a copy of the book, My Israel Trail, Finding Peace in the Promised Land, what's the best way to get a copy of the book?
Well, if you're in Israel, I'm happy to both sign and send you one, even for a discounted price. You can get it in Stamatsky for 79 shekels, and I have a discounted price, including the postage of 60 shekels here in Israel. And if you're outside of Israel or otherwise you just like Amazon, you can get it on Amazon or from my publisher, Cedar Fort, or Barnes and Noble, or any other bookseller.
Unbelievable. No, that's great. Get yourself a copy of the book, and if you want to get in touch with Aryeh, you can always, of course, get in touch with me, and I'll put you in touch with Aryeh. Get yourself a copy of the book. I want to thank you so much for your time, and congratulations on the amazing work you're doing here, helping the people of Africa, Gigawatt Global, and the amazing work you've done through the years with MediaCentral, getting the record set straight on Israel and educating so many journalists who come over here, and somebody who's, again, as you said, has been in the field as I have since I made Aliyah 18 years ago. I get it. I know what it's like working with journalists and whatnot. So I really want to thank you for everything you do for the land of Israel, for the people of Israel, and thanks so much for coming on the show. I really appreciate it. Aryeh Green.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. And everyone out there, we are going to turn off the Facebook Live. We're going to have part 2 of the show, all the latest news here in Israel, of course, everything going on with the political situation. And it looks like we are not going to a 4th election. It looks like that will be pushed off. We'll talk about that in the second half of the show. And the corona situation, Mike Pompeo, Secretary of State of the U.S., is in the country. I just saw his convoy passing by where I am here in Jerusalem, so a lot to discuss. And hope you're all safe wherever you are. In your parts of the world. My name is Josh Hasten. Get in touch with me during the week. Josh@thelandofisrael.com on Facebook, Twitter, and on Instagram as well. Don't go anywhere. We're turning off the Facebook, and check out part 2 of the show. Thanks so much.
Shalom, everybody. This is Jeremy Gimpel from the Land of Israel Network, but also from the Land of Israel Fellowship. Today, Aryeh and I and Tehila Gimpel are preparing for the biblical feasts. We have members from 31 countries joining us every week, Sunday, live at 6 p.m. For those that can't make it live, they get a direct recording sent to them. We're growing together, we're learning together, we're celebrating together. The gates are open for all who want to come and join. And so this is a personal invitation to all the listeners out there. If you want to join the Land of Israel Fellowship, just go to thelandofisrael.com/fellowship, and you can join us tomorrow as we prepare for the big days ahead.
And we are back. Josh Hasten here, Israel Uncensored, on the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com. It is Monday, August 24th, 2020, the 4th of Elul, 5780, coming to you from a beautiful day here in Jerusalem as I stare out the window just outside the walls of the Old City. Top story here in Israel today, Prime Minister Netanyahu on Sunday night announced he will not seek a November election that would be initiated automatically. It would have been initiated automatically tonight, Monday night, if the budget deadline extension bill was not passed into law in the Knesset plenum. Late last night or early this morning, the law was passed, so therefore the budget deadline extended until Monday, December the 3rd, and all political appointments were frozen. According to the compromise, as reported here by the Jerusalem Post, Blue and White would honor the coalition agreement and form an appointments committee that includes Likud representatives. In other words, if the Knesset had not passed the bill or the deadline, the budget rather, and the deadline had not been extended, we would be heading for elections come November. That is not the case. The very last minute, and again, I have not read all the analysis that went into it, And what I really am talking about is why the prime minister decided not to go to elections. He definitely had his reasons. He is a master politician, and he decided it was best not to go to elections at this point. Anybody out there who has read anything on this already, please send me an email, josh@thelandofisrael.com. I'm sure I'll be reading it here later on today. But Israel, at least temporarily, has been spared from going to the polls a fourth time. We'll see what happens after December the 3rd. We could still, in fact, be headed towards elections. At least we have 100 days now without having to deal with election campaigning, when we should be focused on combating the coronavirus. I mean, that was the purpose of this government forming in the first place. As of this moment, 834 Israelis have died as a result of the virus, 22,045 active cases, and we have hit over 100,000 total cases. Right now, 102,380 total cases in Israel. We have a long way to go, a lot of work to be done in order to bring those numbers down, in order to combat the coronavirus. And that was why we established this government in the first place. They have not been getting along. Let's see if they can get their act together as we head to the reopening of schools next week, September 1st, and the high holidays. The coronavirus cabinet is actually supposed to meet today to make decisions on whether Israel will implement some sort of lockdown once again for the high holidays. I know that the coronavirus czar, Gamzu, is against a complete lockdown, so we'll have to see what happens here in Israel later on today as we head towards the holidays. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo landed in Israel on Monday. I actually just passed some of his convoy here in Jerusalem, the first of several stops in the region. His itinerary includes Sudan, Bahrain, two countries whose ties with Israel have warmed recently and which could follow the UAE, the United Arab Emirates, in normalizing relations with the Jewish state, reported here by the J-Post. Pompeo, he's determined to have these other countries, which we most likely already have relationships with behind the scenes, most likely to ask them to go public now and declare that they are, in fact, united with Israel, really, against Iran. That's really what this is all about. I mean, people spin it in so many different ways. It's all about forming a coalition against Iran here, who continues to export terror through their various proxies all over the Middle East. All of that being said, the United Nations Security Council is once again in the headlines because they don't want to stop Iran. That is not their agenda. This body, which was created in order to create peace in the world, build relations between nations, foster ties, and stop conflict and terror around the world. That's not their goal, and we know that because, as reported here by the J-Post in yesterday's paper, 13 of the 15 United Nations Security Council members have refused. They have refused to recognize the legality of a United States maneuver to abolish the Iran deal by triggering a formal process on Thursday that would snap back UN Security Council sanctions against Tehran by September 19th. China and 12 other UNSC members have already written letters to the UN opposing the move. They are against a U.S.-based or a U.S.-backed snapback policy against Iran. If you remember, the arms embargo, United Nations agreement or resolution expired, and they voted on we talked about it last week. Actually, they voted on whether to extend the deal on it, the implementation of sanctions against, or an embargo rather, against the Iranians' ability to purchase weapons, to continue to export their terror. And the UN said, no, we don't want to extend this arms embargo against Iran. and the U.S., of course, up in arms, and Israel, siding with the U.S. on this issue. Mike Pompeo, who I mentioned before, is here in Israel, said the following: "Our message is very, very simple. The U.S. will never allow the world's largest state sponsor of terrorism," referring to Iran, "to freely buy and sell planes, tanks, missiles, and other kinds of conventional weapons. These UN sanctions will continue the arms embargo," Pompeo told reporters on Thursday. He spoke after he and U.S. Ambassador to the UN, Kelly Craft, formally submitted a request to snap back the sanctions. So the question is, what is the world going to say as Iran continues to murder people all over the place, all over the world? Iran or its proxies, Hezbollah, and its other terror groups in Yemen and in countries all over the world. What's the world going to say when Iran continues to export terror and people die? Are they going to say we didn't know about it? What are they going to say? Whoops, sorry. What are they going to say when the UN Security Council will not come together against Iran? How will they deny culpability when they refuse the snapback sanctions against the mullahs in Tehran? It is a crazy world we're living in, folks, where night is day and day is night. And it's not just because it's 2020 and we're going through a crazy year. This has been the case with the UN for years and years and years, of course, always putting Israel under a microscope, holding Israel to a different standard. That is the UN, not creating or making peace, but continuing to perpetuate conflicts all over the world, ignoring genocides, doing absolutely nothing. What a useless, useless organization, the United Nations, and here is more proof. Pompeo explained that he had activated a clause under Resolution 2231, under whose terms the Iran sanctions were revoked in 2015, which allowed a UNSC member to snap back those sanctions due to Iranian noncompliance. In Jerusalem, Prime Minister Netanyahu lauded the U.S. in a special English language video he published less than an hour after Pompeo announced that he had triggered the special mechanism to snap back the sanctions. He said, Netanyahu said, unchallenged, this failure effectively makes the Security Council complicit in arming Iran's murderous regime. Fortunately, President Trump and Secretary Pompeo have refused to accept this. We'll see how it goes. We'll see if the U.S. is able to, in fact, implement these snapback sanctions against the Iranian regime. But it is just a crazy world, folks. It's a crazy world when they could not get the other nations to side with the U.S. Number one, to recommit to the arms embargo, and then to go along with the snapback sanctions. It's really a crazy world. Speaking of terror and Iranian proxies in Gaza, we are seeing now dozens of fires in southern Israel on a daily basis as a result of Hamas launching these incendiary balloons. I can't tell you how many dunam or acres of land have been burned as a result of these fires, in addition to the rockets we've had over the last several days, and Hamas issuing a statement, I believe it was Saturday night, saying that if things don't change in the next 48 hours, of course, blaming Israel for all its woes, saying if Israel does not submit to their demands, and they have a list of demands, ending the so-called blockade of Gaza and all this other stuff, then they would increase the balloons and the rockets, the rocket fire into Israel. So we'll have to see what happens here later on as this 48-hour time frame threat, really, that's what it is, expires. Just to summarize here a little bit, on Friday evening, terrorists in Gaza, as reported by Times of Israel, fired a rocket as Jews were having Shabbat dinner, sending thousands of Israelis running for bomb shelters during their Friday evening meal. So there have been, rockets here and there. I think Thursday night there were 12 rockets fired, and we'll have to see what happens here later on today, later on Monday. We'll see what Hamas does, and more importantly, let's see how Israel responds to this terror organization who is holding its own people in Gaza hostage. Ending on some positive news here, we're talking about Corona, and this is a BDS fail. It is a new technology developed here in Israel, which the BDSers, if you hate Israel, then you shouldn't be allowed to use this. You should boycott this technology. It is an Israeli COVID-19 breath test, which has correctly identified all positive patients in a clinical trial, according to a newly peer-reviewed study. The device uses nanotechnology to identify compounds from the lungs that are present in the breath of coronavirus patients. In other words, if you want to do this, if you want to check for coronavirus, instead of having to wait for a lab, having to wait 24 hours to see if you need to go into isolation, or if you're positive for the virus, or if people around you need to isolate themselves, this new technology developed here in Israel would allow you simply to breathe into a device, and within 30 seconds, I believe, you would know whether you are positive or not for the coronavirus. Another amazing technology from the startup nation coming out of Israel, and hopefully soon it will be exported to the world and will save lives. Just one more example of how Israel is contributing to the world. You BDS haters out there, don't use the test. It's not for you. At the same time, throw away your laptop and your cell phone and everything else you have, because most likely something built in Israel is inside your device. So do not be a hypocrite. Throw away all of your technology. That's going to do it for today, for the 24th of August, 2020. It is the month of Elul. It is the 4th of Elul, 5780. We are on the home stretch, folks, for the year 5780, heading towards Rosh Hashanah, which is less than 4 weeks away. Unbelievable how time flies when you're having fun, or how time flies even in a crazy year, which it certainly has been. My name is Josh Hasten. Thanks so much, Binyamin Bresky, engineer extraordinaire, Tabitha Epstein, and everyone else involved in the Land of Israel Network here at thelandofisrael.com. Get in touch with me during the week. Josh at thelandofisrael.com. On Facebook, it's Joshua Hasten, or Josh Hasten Israel Advocacy and Journalism. On Twitter at Josh Hasten, and on Instagram as well. Signing out here from another beautiful day in Jerusalem, capital, the eternal capital of the Jewish people. Everyone out there in the wonderful world of ours, be safe. Shalom, shalom. Have a great week.
You're listening to the Land of Israel Network at thelandofisrael.com, broadcasting the truth and beauty